Popcorn Therapy, holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. I'm Julie Peters. I'm a counseling therapist, a tarot reader, a writer, and a witch. I love to think deeply about pop culture and find out what our stories can tell us about who we are as individuals and as a culture, spiritually, psychologically, physically, and in all kinds of other ways. If you like that too, you are in the right place. Welcome to Popcorn Therapy. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Popcorn Therapy. This is actually a part 2 of the conversation that I had with Natalie Rousseau on Anne Rice's Mayfair Witches. This is a part of the Witches on Witches series that I want to do because Natalie and I are indeed real life witches, and I thought it would be interesting for you to hear what a couple of witches think about a show on witches. So we had so much fun having this conversation. We went for almost 2 hours, so I decided to separate this episode out into 2 parts. And in the part that you're going to hear now, we're doing some fact or fiction. So we're looking at different pieces that happen in the show and how closely we relate to those pieces from a sort of real person's witchcraft perspective. The episode beforehand is a little bit more about the show itself. We really get into lots of different pieces about the show. So the part 1, I would recommend listening to once you've seen Mayfair Witches. This episode has fewer spoilers in it because we're talking a little bit more about our relationship with the things that we see on the show. I'd still recommend seeing the show before listening, but if you want to just kind of hear a witchy perspective on some of this stuff, you might enjoy this episode for that as well. One of the things that we did relate to is the thrall, which is being in the inner world in this space where, you know, time kind of has no meaning and you kind of get lost in this inner world place, which is a very real experience that many witches go through in ritual and meditation and things like that. So we were joking that we'd gotten into a thrall when we were having this conversation, just having so much fun getting into these things. So I really hope that you guys enjoy this conversation as much as we did. And if you want to go back and listen to part 1, you can. You don't have to. The 2 pieces are separate and can stand on their own. So enjoy. Feel free to go back and listen to part 1 later if you want to. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with me and Natalie Rousseau. Here we go. But maybe we can slide a little bit into sort of a segment that the witches on witches concept that I wanted to get into here. Fact versus fiction, you know, from a couple of real life witches. How much of this is real and how much of it is not real, right? And someone listening who's not as close to it as us might be wondering, like, is this stuff real? Like, when people have these supernatural abilities, how far do they go? So I thought we could talk a little bit about that because there were so many things that I thought were actually like pretty accurate and relatable from a witch perspective in this show. Okay, so the first part that there were a lot of things about Suzanne that I really related to. And this is the Scottish witch who is in the witch hunting era. Basically, she's sort of in, I don't know. I can't remember if they give the date, but
like the 17th
is like 1600, 1700, yeah, something like that. So there's a moment when her friend comes in and has been gored by a boar. And her friend knows that she's going to die. And she has this moment with Suzanne where she says something like, you know, midwifing isn't just about healing. It can also sometimes be about helping people to die. And not that I help people to die. That's not in my scope of practice. And I talk to people about death a lot, right? Like we sit with the death light often, especially if someone is dealing with a death or, you know, if someone is facing a terminal illness or something like that. Like we have to be willing, you know, in the healing work to be able to sit with the darkness as well as the light. You know, as a counselor, I'm just not one of those that's going to be like, let's just try to make this all better and like make it all happy and shiny and good. Like a lot of the gems and riches, I think, of the work that I do comes from being in those darker places. And, you know, I don't think this is my work at this moment, but, you know, there are death doulas as well as birth doulas, and some are both, right? Because what they're doing is they're helping the birth portal is like bringing a life forward at the beginning, but the death is the same portal that you're going back in through, right? And a lot of the work that I've been doing on the goddesses over the last couple of years, something I guess has been kind of fast, but a lot of these pre-patriarchal goddesses were not just bright and shiny, right? Like some of the really ancient ones would be sexuality and war, right? Yeah. Like fertility and death. Because it's a cycle, right? They were all about the cycle. It's not this grow up only in one direction. You really have to be connected to both. So I felt like that was one piece that I really felt when I was watching that, is like, oh yeah, that's a really important lesson for a witch, is like, you have to kind of get comfortable with death and darkness and all of those things, maybe depending on the kind of work you're doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, first of all, that whole theme exploring the idea of healers and, the cunning woman, the village cunning woman, which would be the woman that, can offer healing when that is what is needed, and can also dispatch someone from pain. In this case, someone needed a quick death. In that case, we're going to die painfully from being gored, or we're going to help this along. And I love that parallel, in healing work, like in counseling work, like sometimes we're sitting with someone to help them, midwife them through a process of letting a part of themselves die, recognizing that a part of their identity is passing away, changing form, transforming. And to me, this is what, if we think of the witch working with great animist forces, like this is the force of the goddess, as you say, like the goddess is this changing world, this mortal experience, which is birth and life and death. It is continual transformation. And so if we don't have a capacity for acknowledging darkness, difficulty, pain, loss, then I just think it's a huge denial of life. And then it tends to create those really limiting and often harmful binaries of good versus bad, dark versus light, evil versus good. It's just not helpful. But it's
absolutely. Yeah. And so after, I think it's either that friend or someone else, somebody dies. And there's this interesting scene where Suzanne is at this very buttoned up kind of funeral where everyone's being really quiet and everything. And this woman kind of whispers to her, like, we're going to do the real funeral later. Like, come with me. And so later that night, they're in the woods, they're dancing, they're like howling and keening and like really using their voices and crying. And then later in modern times, we see Rowan attending a New Orleans funeral rite where there is singing and drumming and like marching, and there's this whole other perspective that like the dead are with us, right? And we can always connect to them in these different ways. And I feel like that's a theme that comes back several times throughout the show. But I felt like that was really relatable too, because I feel like around that theme of the death light and being willing to be with that, I'm often coaching clients to like slow down and take some time to grieve, like especially around the winter solstice and like the late fall. And if you have death anniversaries or grief anniversaries, which might not be about literal death, but death of a self, an identity, loss of a friendship, like it could be anything, to allow yourself to consciously acknowledge those anniversaries, because often when we don't, our bodies do it anyway. And we will often seasonally, annually find, oh, like I'm in that weird funk again that I was in the same time of year last year, or like, oh, I've relapsed on this thing, or, our bodies will kind of react to these things if we don't pull them up into conscious awareness. And like so much of the healing of like the moving your body, the way that they're dancing in both of these funeral rites, so much of the way we do it in this patriarchal culture is like, okay, go back to work, like pull yourself together, button it up, save that for later. So many people who experience major grief will talk about how there's an expectation around them that like, you should be over it by now, like however long that is. People have a bit of a timeline in their head for grief. And so, being able to like really express it and feel it, and that being even a little joyful, right? That, you can grieve and feel joy and remembrance and love for the person that you lost at the same time. I feel like those rituals really express that in a way where I feel like that's something majorly missing in our culture today.
Oh God, yes. Like for me, like this is again another like definition of like who is a witch, is someone who practices ritual. And exactly,
Especially seasonally. Yeah.
especially seasonally, and also as you said, like in a very like somatic, expressive way, like express what we think of like expressive arts, right? Like when you think of theater, I mean the root of theater is theos, to be infused with the divine, and the original theater, right,
Mm.
came from the Greek tragedies, a way of working with this collective trauma. So ritual is so so important, and to really bring our whole being into ritual is a way of working with these energies. And like you said, I mean, I know for myself, some of the most difficult times in my life are just filled with such acute and intense and terrifying grief. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, and but like there are also the times of the most heightened potency, power, magic, where you're the closest to these, you know, um, other realms. And when we don't have ritual, ceremony, ways of relating with that energy, I think it creates a lot of, frankly, the mental illness, psychological distress, spiritual distress that we have in our culture. And I think it's been one of the greatest tools of oppression, religious institutions and uh, political institutions taking that away from the people, the ability to have a direct experience with life, with the divine, and to celebrate in these ways. And because we've lost that, we lose connection to our own innate power, and reclaiming that in the ways that so many people are these days, I think is a great act of remembrance. And it can be awkward and difficult. And I know many people can be like, that feels strange. But just to like give yourself over to that, like that scene in that funeral where
Hmm.
they're howling and they're keening and all that, you can be like, wow, that looks kind of like wild. But that's when you're part of true ritual like that, where people are letting themselves be taken over. It is wild if you're standing outside of it, but that's not the point of it. The point is to give yourself over to it. And on the other side of that, it's often easier, as you said, to integrate these experiences rather than being taken out by them.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the tools I've been using a fair amount lately, because I guess it's just been coming up, is like, again, in our culture, we're so kind of emotionally illiterate. I think like most of us are just really not taught like what an emotion is, what to do with it, how to express it. And I think patriarchy is especially hard on men, really, in this way, in teaching them that like it's paramount that you do not express these things and that you do not show that you have this sensitivity and vulnerability, which is again a reason why I love Cyprian's empathy. And like I can't remember if he does cry. Like there's one moment where I think it's when he feels Deirdre's heartbreak at losing Rowan. He cries, like he feels with them. And like, I just love seeing that because I feel like men are so taught that they should have super strength, and that should mean not feeling your feelings. So anyway, the tool I've been using is like, what if you put your hands on your heart and you just let yourself feel the thing you're feeling without needing to explain it, name it, justify it, fix it, analyze it? Because so much of the time, even when we come to counseling, even sometimes counselors have this urge, right? Like, how can I fix this? How can I make it better? And especially with grief, that's just not the point. Like, it's actually about really expanding to allow whatever needs to come through that. And there's actually, in my experience, like, once I was able to let go of the fear of grief, there's actually almost a pleasure in it, right? Like there's almost a something sweet in really allowing for that grief, right? So yeah, I feel like that's just been a piece that like I love that practice. Like it's just, what if you didn't have to do anything with it at all, but could just be with it, right?
Yeah. Something's coming up to me that like another theme in the show that I thought was really potent was just about that, about like looking at masculinity, and I would say like toxic masculinity and the disempowered masculine, like, that whole group of kind of like incel type characters that want to capture the witch and take it. And that was really potent, I thought, and strikes like real fear in my heart to this day, because I'm like, they're naming some very real things that are alive in our world right now. Like women today and queer folk and people that are different are at risk still for these types of things. And there seems to be, even as we have, I see in so many of the circles that I'm in, a movement to support men in getting out from underneath the shackles of patriarchy. We see this almost like moving to the other extreme end, where men gathering in groups where they feel victimized and powerless, and going to that extreme place where women become the enemy. And it's all rooted in that inability to be with their own feelings of maybe vulnerability or unlovability or grief at being out of connection. I thought that was really potent how they wove that into the story, and it's an important topic, I think, for anyone exploring these things around witchcraft today, is to also recognize, like in the West here, we have a lot of privilege in being able to say I'm a witch, and even still there's real danger. But in many places in the world right now, it's really serious, because there's almost like a resurgence of these crimes against women, because many men
and as you've touched on too, reproductive rights, medical rights, medical autonomy, bodily autonomy, like these things have always been interconnected with the witch story, right? The idea that I'm not comfortable with a woman or whoever it is having power, specifically politically, that threatens, like at the time, it was the Roman Catholic Church wanting to come in and sort of take advantage of a lot of the instability in Europe at the time, because there was all kinds of stuff going on, and kind of wanting to corral people into like, ooh, I can get a lot of power if I can get people under my control in this way. So again, to be clear, I'm not criticizing like God or Catholicism or like that like religion. But the usually men who came in and really took advantage of people's vulnerability to do that. And so, the way the witch, torture and burning and control and all that stuff happened, it was so sexualized and so bodily focused, right? And lurid, really, in a lot of ways. And so, one thing I was going to bring up the incel witch hunters, because that was probably the most horrifying part of the show, because it did feel so close to home on two levels. Like I think you and I have maybe talked about before, how sometimes you have this ancestral fear that comes up. Like it might have been you that was telling a story about, someone walking into a woo shop for the first time, like a witchy shop, and having this terror of like, someone's going to catch me doing this and I'm going to be, killed, actually, is the fear, right? Because that's what it was in our DNA, in our blood, which like we do know DNA carries phobias and fears and like traumatic experiences, because it benefits the next generation to like know what to fear, right? And so there's sort of this ancestral thing that comes up sometimes, where there's like this fear of saying I'm a witch. What do people think that means? And especially in this current political climate, it actually does feel scarier in this way of just like, who's going to come after me? Like the internet trolls, which is how it starts in the show. And then people taking it really seriously, right? And like burning women and everything. Like I could 100% see that happening now. Yes. So there's the ancestral fear, but it's still present. And for me, like what I have thought about around this is that that persecution energy has for the most part softened in the modern day to ridicule. So it's gone from, I'm going to murder and torture you because you're doing something against God. It's shifted, but now it's like, you must be stupid or an idiot, or like, I think a lot of people who have these abilities or intuitions or these interests or whatever it is, kind of, think twice about who they share that with, as I still do to this day, because I mean, obviously I'm being very public about it, and that's fine. But, at a party, like, I'm not just going to tell anybody like, oh, I'm a witch or whatever, because some people are still really uncomfortable with that. And that it might come down on me as ridicule or judgment. But now, specifically in this moment, it does feel like it could so easily switch right back over to violence like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with that. And I agree that was the most like truly terrifying part of the show, because it feels so alive and true right now. And yes, for the most part, that softening to ridicule is another way of disempowering. And I think that many people, I mean, like you and I, feel that we still work with that, even though we are quite visible, like expressing our woo. There's still that thing. And I deal with it sometimes like, oh, I don't want someone to think that can't meet them in a professional capacity as a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, knowing that I also have great reverence for these other modalities, like working with plant medicine and weaving symbolism like tarot or astrology into these things. Like all of these tools are valuable in my mind, but for some people, me just saying that might make them lose confidence in me, as if, well then if you believe in that, then that must make you less intelligent. And it's just, so it's tricky. But I think it's also really a key point that you bring up, that those like kind of epigenetic markers in our blood.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous to be visible. And, I really hope and pray that we don't see a resurgence of witch burnings. But
yeah, it's really quite terrifying.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple other things like relatable from a witch perspective, fact versus fiction, having a demon or daimon or spirit guide or whatever who helps give you power. So yeah, actually, this is a real thing. Not in the sense that there's like an entity who can blow doors open and like kill people for you. Like it's not like that. But I think a lot of us, when we're tapping into whether it's tarot reading or counseling or whatever kind of work we're doing, there's often even a prayer for like my guides, or like, I kind of have like one that helps me in particular who's masculine in form, and like, it's not someone that is trying to use my body to create children for some prophecy. Like, obviously it's not like that. But yes, there are, like, I think you touched on this before when you said, recognizing your relationality with the human and non-human, the ancestors, like there can be so many entities that you can pull from that can help you in these moments. I'm going to do a podcast on Nosferatu soon, which have you seen that one yet? Okay, it's also it's horror. But at the very beginning, this young woman is like asking, like, somebody help me, like anyone from any of the realms. And she awakens, Count Dracula, basically. And I was like, okay, witches, we got to set our protections. We got to be clear who we're asking for. Like it kind of made me laugh a bit because, I think a lot of us do learn, like, okay, you have to set your circle and you have to be clear, like, mm-hmm. I'm asking for entities who are working for the good of all, like mm-hmm. who, can benefit me and the people I'm working with and the highest good of all. Like, you have to actually be really clear about that because, yeah, I think sometimes you can get a little involved with some entities that are, they're never going to be as powerful as, or I don't know, maybe that's not the right word for it, but like they're non-embodied, right? So I don't know, this is a whole other topic that we can kind of get into, but the short answer of that is like, yes, we do have guides and helpers and ancestors. Sometimes they're animal guides, sometimes we don't know what they are. Sometimes like we have an awareness there's something, but we have no idea what it is. Sometimes it's like a very close named, relationship with someone that you're aware of in your own inner world, but that's real. Yeah.
It's real. So, like, first of all, let's just look at it in the form of ancestors and ancestry, which is another way that we can frame this story, right? Like one of my core teachers, Dr. Daniel Four, he speaks with us. We all are having a relationship with our ancestors, whether it's conscious or not. And we may have we may have really strong, healthy, well ancestors that actually offer a huge blessing force into our life. Maybe we've just had a really charmed life and we think it's just, we're so lucky. No, it's because you have great ancestors who are supporting you from beyond. in the same way, we can come through a lineage where there's been a lot of impact, trauma, harm, and in a way we kind of are haunted. And that's one way we could look at it. Like, this is an ancestral ghost that's haunting this family, right? And so when we make conscious relationships with our ancestors, and the first rule of ancestral work is that you do that with guardianship and protection, and you form alliance with healthy, well ancestors who want to help and support you, it can help you to work against some of those more the burdens that might come through the lineage. And so I have an ancestral guide, which comes from my father's line, which offers a lot of support in my life, a lot of guidance. And then this is, again, in many Indigenous communities, this understanding, I think it's just a very Western oversight, this idea that there's not entities that want to cause harm. Of course there are, right? Of course there is such thing as sorcery, people who want to work that harm on purpose. And there are benevolent, other than human entities that want to support us. I just returned from Peru, where I did a traditional Amazonian plant dieta. And in that way, I'm forming a relationship with a master plant spirit. It's plant spirit medicine. So I'm working with a plant, an ancient being. And that plant is invited into my body and into a relationship with me. And now that plant spirit exists inside of me and guides me and is like helping me to navigate. And it's a completely different experience. So that's real. This is very, very real. And it's not, again, these shows can make it look so fantastical in a way that might seem absurd. But the truth is more magical. And it is a really real thing. And yes, guardianship and protection is very important, not in a way of being overly terrified that there's evil devils that are trying to get us, but just that we are wise with what energies we relate with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, so one layer of the work I do, depending on who I'm working with and what's coming up and so on, is, the inner work that tends to be somatic, where we're looking at, maybe a pattern in, let's say, someone's love life. There's a pattern that keeps coming up, and we'll go inwardly and we'll feel like, okay, what comes up for you around this? Often there's an inner child sitting there, but often I'll ask, like, whose voice is that? Or is this yours? And it's not uncommon for it to be like, actually, that doesn't sound like my voice. And sometimes it'll be like, oh, that's my mom or whatever it is. And sometimes we go in together and, like, is it sort of an evil entity that's trying to manipulate the person? Like, in my experience, it could be almost like a trapped trauma somewhere, right? And I've had experiences where it's like, okay, there's a woman somewhere along the line who is just really trying to protect you from men and really getting in your way because she wants you to be safe, much like Carlotta, right? And so sometimes we have to do this inner work of like, actually, this is my life and my choices, and I appreciate your learnings and like I honor you, but you are no longer allowed in this space. And, it's not, I'm not planning for it to go in that witchy direction, but sometimes that's just where the body and the system is taking us. And we discover that, yeah, there is actually an ancestral, or maybe it's a past life, like ancestral past life. It could be kind of the same thing. But there's something from not this embodied life that's like sitting in the background that's actually influencing what's happening here. And you have choices about that. And once you can set your boundaries around that, you can really shift that pattern, which is like, I don't know how to explain that. I don't know what the real, scientific explanation behind that is, but I do know the pattern changes, right?
That's it. Yeah. We can't, not everything can be explained in scientific terms. And another one that I think you and I are both familiar with is working with deity currents, right? Like, especially both of us coming through yoga, when I first turned towards the very alive deity currents that exist within the Hindu tantric traditions, because it's an unbroken line of reverence for thousands and thousands of years, millions and millions of people. I mean, that energy is palpable. That energy is alive. It cannot be denied. And yet I can't explain it in rational scientific terms,
Yeah.
That doesn't make it not real.
And one other pattern I've really noticed here, when like it's a great idea to call on some external help, is sometimes, not only in this situation, but what I've noticed is that when we're doing inner child work, with someone who was a parentified child, it's harder because that person, like often when we do the inner child work, we go in, we meet the inner child, and then this present day adult can reparent that child, right? And that can be very healing. But if you always had to parent yourself, you always had to parent your siblings, you never got a break from all this, that doesn't feel healing because it just feels like the same thing that you have to do, like that you've always had to do. Mm-hmm. And so again, not with everybody, but in some cases, like, okay, let's call on, Guan Yin or Durga, or one of these goddesses that can feel like that fierce mother that you need to protect you right now. I've been doing a lot of like imaginary grandmother work too, where it's just like, I need someone to just like bake me a pie and sit with me, drink tea. And I'll just do that in my imagination sometimes. Because these entities, like, again, are they real? Are they just imaginary? Doesn't matter because they work, right? They come in and they can help with these things, and it does shift the pattern, right? However we describe like where that comes from, but it certainly feels real and it has real effects.
That's it. It feels real. There's a felt sense experience and it has real effects and can enact change. So yes.
Yeah.
Demons are real.
Yeah. So another, yeah. We're giving all the secrets here so folks can know. We're not scary, real witches, but we can help. So yeah, another character that I found myself relating to quite a bit was Arjuna. I'm not sure if she calls herself a witch, but she definitely has some powers in the Talamasca. And she does, she does this thing with her hands that sometimes you do, like if you're doing Reiki or healing work or something, you can feel the energy field like moving and shifting around someone's body. Sometimes you can feel where it's a little bit stuck. And there's that scene where Cyprian has been pierced by Carlotta's dagger, actually. And it becomes this sort of supernatural wound, and he needs her help rather than like a hospital to get it out. And she does this ritual with him. And there's a moment where she says, like, I take this sword into my own body to like metabolize this, whatever it is. And she pulls the sword out of her own side. And again, it's not going to be that dramatic and that obvious, but I've had so many moments where, again, it's empathy, right? It's like I'm feeling exactly, or maybe not exactly, but in my own way, like I'm feeling with you what's happening here, like I'm having the tears. Sometimes, in some cases, actually, I'm sure you've experienced this too as a counselor. Sometimes your work is to feel and express something that the client can't.
Yes.
Because there's a block around that for some reason. And being able to feel the anger come up in my body and say like, wow, that makes me feel really angry. Like, what do you notice about that? And then that can unlock the anger for them. And I've also had experiences with Reiki, which like lately with my Reiki, I'm like, I don't know. This is kind of, it's a wild practice because it's so subtle and so simple. But I've had a few experiences where like I enter the Reiki and I'm just taken over by like a coughing attack. Mm-hmm. Or exhaustion, that as soon as the Reiki's done, it's completely gone, right? Like you're feeling something that the other person's system is trying to express, which again, if you think of yourself as a part of the web of everything, we're not as disconnected from each other as we think, right? And so, no, it's not a literal sword, but there are moments where it does feel like I'm involved in the healing field that's happening here. And sometimes I can actually intervene. And again, for me, it's a really important principle that I'm not doing the work for someone, but that I might be able to call their attention to, there is anger here, like I'm feeling it in my body, or, what would it feel like to let me help here and let that be a part of the healing process where you're not doing this all alone, right? Or we're bringing in that deity or whatever it is. And I think that actually can be an incredibly powerful form of empathetic magic.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that you're speaking to this. And that, that like it happens in the show, she takes the wound into her. I mean, that's a core part of many shamanistic practices where it can often be enacted in that kind of ritual theater. But what you're speaking about here is exactly, it's a core part of the work that we do, in the way that I was trained in somatic relational therapy. We do this. Therapist does not stay separate. You enter into the field, you feel with, as you said. And that doesn't mean taking on in an unhealthy way. So it really requires a lot of healthy boundaries and healthy empathic resonance, but that ability to feel with, so that the client can feel that they're not alone in holding some very big emotional experiences that can be really overwhelming. And I loved what you brought up there. Sometimes actually it's us being able to feel and even speak to and name the emotion that is really hard for the client to access. So it requires a blurring of that separation, which is a false idea anyway, right? So it is, again, a very real thing that occurs in the healing arts. And it is magical and profound.
It is. And such a different model from that old counseling technique of like being impassive and not sharing anything about yourself and just writing things down on like a little notepad or whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, I think the more, I mean, you know, we may have a bias for what you and I have like done and learned and everything, but it feels like it's actually the connection that's healing. It's not the stuff you talk about. It's not the specific technique that you're doing. Like it really is that, especially with trauma work, like, you know, one way of thinking about trauma is its disconnection. Like the way to heal trauma, it always needs relational reconnection, right? And that can be with the counselor, and the counselor can help you cultivate those connections in other parts of life as well. But, you know, it's interesting to me how often the healing thing has been like just feeling with someone, even without knowing the answers, right? Yeah. And so powerful.
I've done studies now that show that, right? Across the board, there's so many great modalities. It's not about the modality. It's about the relationship between the therapist and the client. And I would say that's the same. And that's similar, I think, to a lot of shamanistic practice. Why some really incredible healing occurs in those spaces is because when there's that trust and that sense of connection in the relationship, then really, kind of, again, I'm just going to use that word, kind of magical healing, spontaneous healing can occur that can't always be explained, but it's because of that intersubjectivity.
Which is a bit of a decolonization, I think, of therapy.
Yes.
Because again, you know, from that perspective that like, you know, the patriarchal authority figures, the men, you know, whatever it was, the church authorities sort of taking over these old knowings that often it was the midwives or whatever who were holding that. You know, one of the things that could be dangerous for a witch was having a pagan practice or ritual or whatever that related to any deity other than like the one the Roman Catholic Church was, you know, sanctioning at the time. So I think some of the work that modern day witches are doing now is remembering, like restoring these older practices that were intuitive, indigenous, right? Like connected to the land, to the non-human beings, to the ancestors. Like so many cultures and belief systems around the world hold that as central. Like the ancestors are so important. And we got so disconnected from that in so many ways. And so when you and I are learning, you know, in school, this is what counseling is, or these are the rules you're supposed to follow, or whatever it is, some of that comes from that, like, you know, the doctors taking over from the midwives and telling them they were doing it wrong and everything has to come from this one tradition and you can't use these other knowings and all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, I think it's an interesting practice to, and sort of indigenize it in a way, like to remember these old ways of being.
Yeah, it actually gives me chills, honestly, thinking of being in a room with a mental health professional that has that model of like being a blank slate and keeping themselves separate. Because to me, it's a power over structure. It's like I'm removed. I'm
power
separate,
over,
I'm
absolutely.
Expert, I've got it all sorted out. I'm not available. You know, I'm not bringing my.
I don't have any of these problems.
Yeah. And then the person coming in, or you know, feeling, and that's already what many people are operating under. There's that assumption that when they sit with someone, oh, you must think I'm so messed up. You know, I hear clients say, oh, you must think I'm so messed up. You know, I was like, no,
right.
At all. Like, you know,
like I relate deeply to this.
Yeah. Why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think fact or fiction is Rowan's medical intuition. Yeah. So, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this because we've kind of been going into it a bit, but, you know, again, it's not that you can literally see the blood vessels and whatever the way that she can. You can't go in and give someone, an embolism. But medical intuition is like a field, I think, for energy workers. And it's something that, like, maybe one day I'd like to hone that a little bit more. It's not so much, my scope, but I think it's part of that empathy practice is, being with someone, there are conscious and unconscious signals. Mm-hmm. Even in a state where someone's saying like, yeah, everything's good. And you're like, okay, so I hear the words that you're saying, but, I can feel that there's some exhaustion here. There's some disappointment or frustration. What's going on with that? And I feel like there are times like, this isn't so much my skill set, but it comes up with Reiki sometimes as you're like, ooh, your right hip, like there's a lot of stuff going on in there. Or like, it feels to me that your sacrum is a little tangled. And, I work with someone at my clinic who's a massage therapist who has amazing intuition in this way where her hands will kind of know, like, oh, you've been clenching your jaw. Like, oh, this, I don't know, like there's just things that she knows somehow. And it's like, again, she doesn't know how she knows, but she knows. So it's, again, not as dramatic as we see it on the show. But I think the medical intuition is actually one that a lot of us can tap into, especially if we hone it.
Oh yeah, that one's like absolutely real. Medical intuition or just clinical intuition. Again, like in the healing arts. I mean, my supervisor, amazing therapist and educator, Leslie Wilkin, teaches a great kind of professional education component on clinical intuition within therapy, because it's a thing, especially when you're allowing yourself, again, when you're communicating body to body, right? When you're actually allowing yourself to track and feel with, and again, having had opportunity to work with really skilled Indigenous healers. That's a huge part of what they're doing. They're using their medical intuition with the support of, their guides and allies to diagnose what is happening within you and to know exactly what the medicine for you is, which is often unique to that person. And I think this has always been a part of the healing arts. And the hard part is that so much of that clinical medical intuition has been read out of people because of these, again, medical institutions that came along and enacted a very different model. And so I think many people throughout time, and especially in the last 1,000 years, have had to deny or reject their own intuition. I would imagine, like many people who are steeped, surgeons and things like that, that often have these hunches and things. And, I'm sure that if you interviewed them, they would all have stories of that. And it's just like whether or not they feel they can trust and respect and honor that or not. But I think the more we work with those capacities, the stronger they get. But it is real. That's real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that intuition, I mean, I feel like a lot of people can relate to it, probably, doctors and therapists and like people who work closely with their clients. But there's also the self-intuition, that can be confusing because you can get hypochondriac with it sometimes. But I feel like sometimes when something's wrong in a way that, like, even when the doctors are like, it's fine, like your blood work is fine, all of these things, but you're like, no, there is something wrong. Like, I know there's something wrong and I just like haven't figured out what it is yet. And I imagine a lot of mothers have also had that experience of like, no, we're going to the hospital. And like, somebody else is going to say, no, it's fine. It's just a normal thing. But like the mother's intuition can kind of come in. And I don't know how sort of like studied this is, but there's a lot of this stuff about how mothers' brains change when they're pregnant and when they're postpartum and all those things. And there's certain kind of attention that you pay to your child where like a slight change in skin color, you'll notice, right? And so much of what we're talking about with this witchy stuff, it's just paying attention. It's stuff that's already there. It's not having some special supernatural gift given by a demon. It's actually that the information is already there. It's just that we have tended to cut ourselves off from the many ways of knowing that we have. Like, we're very sight oriented, but we're not very gut oriented, and I feel like anyone can be a witch in the sense that, anyone can cultivate the skill because the skill is paying attention. It's not following someone's rules. Again, from a non-denominational perspective, it's not doing the spell in the correct order with the right ingredients. Like, you know, with all of that stuff, if I cast a spell, it's often intuitive for me. And I often say, like, any spell I cast, I'm casting on myself. Like, it's not on somebody else. It's on my own, you know, perspectives or what I want to let go of or whatever it is. It's like kind of doing a version of psychological work on myself. So, you know, it's really paying attention and just allowing those other ways of knowing to be present. And everybody, including men, who've been so cut off from this, even more so than women, who've been a little more encouraged to, like, you can explore your feelings or whatever it is. But, like, it's even harder for men, I think, to feel like they have permission to access this stuff. Of course they can if they want to. Anybody could. But yeah, it's there.
It's there. And I love that. And I just want to echo that. Anybody can be a witch. It's just about paying attention and developing these capacities that we all have within us, and then connecting that to the wider web, the wider world of information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, the thrall is just one other thing that I related to a little bit. There's a few moments in the show where someone is kind of locked in a loop of their own imagination. Again, of course you don't get locked in, but I feel like when you do this kind of work, you could get kind of lost in, like, a visualization or a past life regression, or, you know, maybe using plant medicines as a way that you can remove yourself from, like, everyday reality and tap into something else. And that reality feels just as real as the other one. You know, a lot of us use dreaming too as a part of our paying attention. The dreams I've been having lately have been so, it's like sometimes I wake up and it's like I'm confused about, like, where the reality is, like, where am I? So I feel like the thrall, you know, it's obviously not as powerful as that, but there are moments when I think, you know, if you do this kind of work, you can get into a thrall in kind of a nice way and kind of a beautiful way. Like, again, when I'm guiding someone through that inner work, we might meet ancestors, we might meet inner selves, we might, you know, meet that teenager who's really hurt by that thing, and, like, we can really resolve it. And sometimes people come out of it and they're like, what the heck just happened to me? Like, that was so real and feels so powerful. But what was that? Like, it was just my imagination. It's like, well, just your imagination. Yes. Like, your imagination is where the magic is.
Oh, I love this topic and could go on about this for so long, but just the power of, like, trance states and how deeply important and integral they are to a healthy psyche, and the quality of knowing that we as humans have always accessed through trance states, whether we enter them through yoga, through dance, through movement, through song, through visualization, through plant medicine. And equally, I just want to name also, like, dissociative states, right? And there's always a risk, right? Of dissociative states, trance states. Like, can we get lost in there? Can we start to have trouble differentiating between that state and what is real? You know, those are sure the risks, and that's why it's important that we have, you know, we learn healthy containment, and that we're doing all of the really important things to help us to be anchored and grounded in our body and in the world, so that we can then access these altered states, these other ways of knowing that are extremely valuable and important. And yes, dream work is one of them. And yeah, I agree. This time of year, I always find this time of year, I think of it as like the pre-dawn darkness, like, you know, early morning, you always have the most vivid dreams. This time of year is like that. And my dreams are off the hook. They're crazy. They're so big. And so I get so much information about what I'm even, you know, I think I'm pretty tuned in and aware. And then my dreams let me know, oh, I'm actually working with certain things that I've been sliding under the radar and I'm not aware of. And then my dreams let me know. So again, developing these other ways of knowing and learning how to enter different states of awareness, and to do that fluidly and skillfully, I think is really valuable, and I would say is a part of healthy witchcraft.
Yeah, and it is a sort of a superpower that we can dissociate in traumatic situations, right? Like, we all have that capacity. And it's kind of terrifying. And, like, obviously we don't want to be in a dissociative state all the time, but what a wonderful thing that a child could be going through something horrific and they're able to disconnect from their body and watch it as if from a distance to protect themselves from the pain that's happening there. And then it needs to be unpacked later because often it's sort of stored in a little place there. But like that is a magical power that we have, like as human beings. It's innate, right? And important. It's a survival thing, right? Not even a skill. It's a survival magic. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for coming and doing Witches on Witches with me. Yeah, love the fact or fiction. So now those of you listening, you know a little bit more about what a real witch is up to and what it looks like and doesn't. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Yeah. So thank you so much, Natalie. That was a wonderful conversation. I always love talking with you about this stuff. We went in so many interesting directions.
It's so worth it. Great conversation. Yeah, it's really great food for thought. So it's given me a lot that I've been contemplating in the last month on all of these topics. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Natalie.
Yeah, bye.
So as always, thank you so much for listening to Popcorn Therapy. I hope you enjoyed that Witches on Witches. And if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have comments, depending on where you're listening, you can leave a comment on the episode. You can get in touch with me via my website, which is juliepeters.ca. I'm on Instagram at juliepeterswellness and on TikTok at Popcorn Therapy. Natalie Rousseau is also natalierousseau.com. I will link her information in the show notes as well. It's very helpful to me if you share these episodes, if you subscribe, if you follow, do all of the clicky things. That just helps more people to be able to find the show. And I really appreciate your listening. I would love your thoughts and comments. Thanks for listening.